welcome back to the OVGA podcast. This is Sanford. I'm here with Dan, and we have a collector guest with us, Chris Chamberlain. Hey, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Nothing like starting things off with an awkward pause. I love it.
It's like, all right,
it's great to have you here, Chris, and we're looking forward to talking. Thanks for spending the time with us.
For sure.
You know, I think they always expect me to like go a little longer with the introductions, right? Ibrahim's better at plugging the website and thing. And so, but yeah, we have together with us our special guest, Chris Chamberlain, and he'll kind of be both you'll be a collector guest for this episode, but as we talked about last time, a few different episode formats. Artist spotlights, having some guests talking about certain topics. I think today having Chris here, we'll have him as a collector guest and some of that side, but we'll end up doing a bit of an artist spotlight as well. So kind of a preview for that. Before we really jump in, right, this is the OVGA podcast. We help run the website originalvideogameart.com and then a corresponding Facebook group, right, Original Video Game Art Collectors. And here we are. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of jumping in, right? Like we were chatting a few minutes before here, but it's funny, put it back on you, right? Tell us a bit about yourself, right? How would you introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Chris Chamberlain. Been a long time gamer. I think in 1979 or 1980 is when my dad brought home an Intellivision, a Mattel Electronics Intellivision. So that was kind of my first game system. Learned how to play poker and blackjack and football and a bunch of other things based off that system. But it was the Nintendo Entertainment System, like most people, where I was just like, okay, I'm going to find a way to work in the game industry in some way, shape, or form. I think back then I was like, I'll probably be a Nintendo gameplay counselor. Didn't set my sights nearly high enough. But it was a lot of fun. And my dad was kind of a career guy who worked at Boeing, and he wanted me to be a pilot. And as soon as, I started getting into games and I was like, I'm going to work in the game industry, I was dead to him. Not really, but he was very disappointed that I didn't kind of go on that way.
What part of the country were you in?
Seattle,
Okay.
The greater Seattle area. So I lived in Bothell, and now I live out in Monroe. So it's about an hour away from Seattle proper.
Yeah.
But you were close to both Boeing and Nintendo right there.
Exactly, yeah. And Microsoft. Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, me growing up, I don't know if this is for same case for Dan, but I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to work in games too. That's what it's going to be. And I go and I tell my parents excitedly, okay, I'm going to be, I guess games means I got to be a programmer. Okay, I'm going to go out to school in California. And eventually my mom kind of, at some point, is like, she's had enough of me talking about it, right? And it's like, so you're going to go all the way across the country and just leave, huh? And like, not that changed anything. I just remember that conversation, right? I'm probably, she was a little more explicit in her language, right? And, stayed on the East Coast and things, right? But you being right there is kind of a very different situation.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was just going to say that I had no idea, Sanford, after all this time, I've known you for quite a while, that you were looking at doing it professionally for a while there. That never really crossed my mind myself.
More high school, right? Where you're kind of like, oh, I like games. What should I do? Oh, I'll do some programming, and I'll like, you kind of, captivated by the games. That would be a cool thing to do. But like Chris followed through on it, right? I was kind of like,
Chris made it work.
Find something else.
Chris made it work. So tell us about how that happened, Chris.
Yeah, I started going to school at Eastern Washington University and had the goal to be a programmer as well. And back then they didn't have any like game specific programs. It was just you're learning to code, and it was hard to kind of motivate myself. I was trying to, whenever we had like programming projects, I would try and create like creating your own character in D&D. I'm going to roll 3 dice or 4 dice and take the highest 3 numbers and give you a character sheet to fill in and things like that. But man, it drove me nuts when I would, finish my project and then run it and it would blow up and I'd have to figure out where I made the mistake and go back. It was just kind of this cycle that I did not enjoy. And so after 2 years, I had a game store where I was renting out games. It was probably around the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era. And it was pretty successful. We did well. It was in Woodinville, Washington. And after a while, that kind of floundered a little bit and went under. And then I opened one in Bellevue, Washington as well. And that one we really specialized in the import games. It was around the PlayStation and Sega Saturn era. Nintendo 64 was coming out soon. And we found a way with a Japanese company where they wanted magic cards and comic books, and I wanted the Japanese games and systems before they came out. And so every week they would send me like Gamist magazine and
Hmm.
Famitsu, and I would go through and circle what I wanted and put 4 copies of this. And
Hmm.
they,
Wow.
and then I opened accounts with like Diamond Comics and sent them the catalogs, and they would circle what they wanted and fill out order forms, and it was super successful. We would trade every week. I would get a shipment of new games, and we were getting stuff that Japan always got the best versions of the games that were uncensored at that time.
Hmm.
They were getting them like a year or 2 years in advance. They had games that never came out in the United States. And so that was a lot of fun doing that until about 1999. And then somebody wanted to buy that, and they took over, and within 6 months they turned it into a Beanie Baby store,
Oh
and
gosh.
that one
Oh
went under.
no.
Oh gosh.
But at that point, I had gotten a job at Looking Glass Studios. Now, Looking Glass created the System Shock franchise, and they were very big on the East Coast, but they had kind of a satellite studio over here in Seattle. And so my first game was testing Destruction Derby Nintendo 64 for $10 an hour, and I thought I was doing the best job ever. And it was a lot of fun, and I got to work on that one. There was a couple of unreleased titles I got to work on, but that studio eventually went under at the end of 99. And I had a few months off, and I decided I was going to go finish my degree. And if the game thing was working out so well with renting and selling, then maybe I'll just get a business degree. So I finished my 4 year degree and got a business degree. And then basically went to Microsoft at that point. I interviewed as a contractor, got a job in February of 2000 working on Crimson Skies for PC,
Okay.
which was a lot of fun.
And
And
that
once,
one's actually
So
illustrated by Drew Struzan, right? The
right,
box art for
right.
that one.
It is, yeah. Yeah. But walk me so Chris, like this is fascinating. This is not at all how I pictured this interview going. Like, because I pictured, okay, he works at Microsoft, he works in games, he probably went through and took some technical courses and then just kind of started at Microsoft. You took this whole like zigzag through like having your own game store and stuff to get there. So how do you go from you've got a store to you're working on Crimson Skies? Like I know you had a little bit of experience there on like testing Destruction Derby, but how did that leap from kind of testing the game a little bit at $10 an hour to actually working on Crimson Skies go?
yeah, I mean, I interviewed at Microsoft, and they told me it was going to be a position for Age of Empires 2 as a tester.
Hmm.
I think
Cool.
there I was making $13 or $14 an hour, so it was a huge increase for me.
Okay.
And I went through the interview loop, and the first two of the three interview loop went really well. And I got to the third guy, and he was like, "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, we already have somebody who's been working here on a team we have called Recon, which playtest games, and that guy's going to get the job because he's been here and he's really good at the game and he's been playing it forever." I was kind of dejected, but this interviewer and he had Metallica posters all over his office, and I was a big fan of Metallica, and we started talking about the band, and eventually he was like, "Listen, I'm the test lead on Crimson Skies, and I need a tester too. Are you interested in all at air combat games?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I love Afterburner and all these other games." And so he's like, "All right, I'll give you a shot on my team." So that's how it worked out, and that's where I
Wow.
started. And within 6 months, they offered me a full time position because I was logging the most bugs on the team, and I was very passionate. I think I also there was kind of a bad relationship with the developer that was just right down the road. They were going to be bought by Sony. They were kind
Hmm.
of piecing out on this project, and almost their entire studio was working on what would become SOCOM for PlayStation 2. And uh, every week they would send a different tester and a different developer from the Microsoft site on site, and it wasn't the best relationship, and everybody would complain that it was, everybody was fighting with each other. And I did it once or twice, and then I was like, I told that guy, like, just make me the guy you send every week. And he was like, nobody wants to do that. And I was like, listen, what's going to happen is they're going to be mean to me for a few weeks, and then I'm going to find some way to break through with them, and then I'm going to become part of their team and I will get the job done. And the guy was like, if I do this, you're going to be that guy, like, even if you hate it. And I was like, do it. And so he made me and another guy who was a developer do that. And sure enough, like a couple weeks in, we found out they were into Street Fighter 2. I was really good at Street Fighter 2. I started beating all of them, gaining their respect, and then they started inviting me out to lunch. And I mean, we had a great relationship, and we finished the game strong. So that's how that title worked out.
Awesome. So, so what do you do today? Like, what's your role today at Microsoft?
I am no longer at Microsoft. I did 16 years
Hmm.
there and got to work on some amazing titles like the original Halo Combat Evolved. I worked with Rare for about 8 years on Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts and Viva Pinata, Cameo Elements of Power, Conquer Live and Reloaded, and a bunch of other titles. That's probably my favorite 8 years of my career.
Yeah.
Worked with Epic several years on Gears of War 3, kind of ending that original trilogy. And then kind of went from testing to engineering to game design to production and executive production. So I left Microsoft after a while, worked for a social casino company. That's where I met Stephen Peringer at, and was there for just over 5 years, and then went back to Microsoft for a year and a half. They lured me back, telling me that I could work on Xbox games, but then once I got there, it was working on Microsoft Casual Suite, which it's hard to get excited about Solitaire and Minesweeper and things like that. So I moved
Mm.
over to my current company about 2.5 years ago called TransPerfect, and we help other people build their games. So if they need art or if they need game developers or QA, we're the ones who can find low cost resources around the world to basically help them do what they need to do. So
Awesome. Okay,
So
terrific.
so
Go ahead.
what is a social casino company? Is that how you phrased it?
yeah, the company I worked for was called Double Down Interactive, and they were the first company that basically came up with the idea that people would want to play casino games on PCs or mobile device or Facebook or things like that. And so they were hugely successful out the gate. They got bought by a real gambling company called IGT. They make the slot machines, and we had licenses to make all the original games. And so those land-based casino machines are developed in Unity. They originally were running off of Xbox XNA hardware, and so we figured out a way to port those games and have them almost be one-for-one recreations of the what you could play in the casino. So
Yeah.
people felt like they were practicing
Hmm.
uh, for when they really went to the casino, and it was the same math models. You had the same win rates and things like that. So that's what social casino is. It's just kind of software where you can walk through a virtual casino, play the different
Hmm.
real life slot machines, and some of them we created on our own too. But that's what it was. It was learning all about math models and mobile development and mobile releases and things like that.
It's funny when you go back to like your real start in games, and late 70s and some of that, right? That it's like there's a blackjack game, right? There's a
Yep.
roulette game. There's like
Yeah, and
the
you're
entire
back there
like that's what it
20
is, right?
years later. Oh my
And
Yeah.
gosh.
like so on the one hand, it's this new concept, right? Because you've got, I guess, an avatar and you're walking through the casino, but like that was so much of gaming's start, right? Because it was, you had visual representations of games that people knew. You could sell them something they know, and then I guess as you start selling them something they don't know, then if we bring this one into our like box art OVGA kind of conversation, right? Then you're selling someone Mega Man and they don't know what a Mega Man is. So you got to get some good art in the box, right? To help, well, bad art for Mega Man, but generally, right? You got to get good art on your Street Fighters to sell people the game. Um, huh. So,
So,
yeah, Dan, over to you, Dan.
well, I was just gonna say, so that was really interesting in terms of walking through how you got to kind of where you are now, and thanks for sharing that with us. And I'm also just curious to know, how you ended up kind of on the collecting original video game art scene, because I just kind of have this sense that and I don't know if this is how it happened, but I just kind of have the sense that you showed up on the group one day and started collecting, and it just kind of came out of the blue, sort of, for me. So walk me through that. Like, how did you find the group? Did you have a friend that collected? Did you see something on Heritage? Like, how did that interest develop for you?
Yeah, I think it kind of started back in the 90s where I loved playing Dragon's Lair when I was a kid and Space Ace, and I was never good at Space Ace. Dragon's Lair I eventually learned pretty well and could play all the way through it on 1 credit. I mean, you can get through the whole game in like 10 minutes or so if you're good at it. And I realized, I mean, I'd been collecting Japanese anime cells for a while. I love the 80s and 90s anime. I can't get into the current stuff like One Piece
Yeah.
and other things, but I started buying cells. They were very cheap and affordable back then, and I was like, Dragon's Lair, I've got to be able to find some Dragon's Lair. And I had read an article about Don Bluth donating almost all his Dragon's Lair and Space Ace art to some college. He wanted to kind of help the next generation learn how he did things. And luckily, I found some art houses that were in California and I think Florida, and they still had a lot of the pieces left with the original backgrounds. Now it's almost impossible to find the original hand painted backgrounds that go with them. And so I think I was buying them for $300, $400 a piece back then, which was a lot for me.
Hmm.
But I was like, these are fantastic. And I got them framed, put them on my wall. So I probably have about a dozen of those, maybe a little bit
Cool.
more. And that was kind of my entry. And then there was different anime for like Fatal Fury that I loved the characters like Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui. So I'd always look out for those cells and buy them and pick them up. And I think that was kind of my entry. Later on, I was a fan of SNK and Neo Geo, and there was a chance where I got to meet IG Shirai. I think her real name is Jin Mara, and she did commissions for people. And I think it was $1,000 that she would do like a full watercolor, basically the quality that would be in an art book. And so I was like, here are the characters I want, like Galford and Nakaruru from Samurai Showdown, and if you could put their animal characters in, and the Akari Warriors team in King of Fighters is my favorite. Seeing those guys, and I think Athena from the Athena game, and later the King of Fighters series. So she did 3 commissions for me, and I love those. They were great, beautiful pieces. That was kind of my next step. And then I did start searching around for like, hey, where is this game art? Like, I wonder if the original art is available and if anybody's figured it out. And I think that's where I started stumbling into the Facebook group, and I was like, wow, there's other collectors that are making this a reality. And so from there, that's where I started educating myself and learning more. And eventually it led to me meeting Steven. We worked together at Double Down Interactive for several years, and I didn't even know the guy had done the artwork. He was just an artist on the team, very quiet and soft spoken, and that's what led to that. Also, Paul Mann, like I think some people in the group had talked about Paul Mann and how he was doing album covers, and one of the members was trying to haggle with him and they couldn't come to terms on a price. And I was like, wow, I'm never going to get an original Metal Gear piece of art from back in the day, but these covers are fantastic. And I reached out to him and felt what he was asking for was really fair. So I think I bought just about every piece that he had left at that point for Contra 3 and Metal Gear. Somebody has one of the ones for the MSX cover of Metal Gear, but I think all the rest I was able to acquire, and I love those. Those are on the wall upstairs. And I bought some other pieces off of him that were movie related, like Army of Darkness and John Carpenter's The Thing, some of my favorite movies. So, and then yeah, Heritage came along. People in the group were talking about Heritage, and I bought the Alien Syndrome piece for the European art. I mean, the US art is not great at all, but that one I felt represented kind of the first boss of the game and kind of the creepy feel of it without being gory or anything like that. So that one really spoke to me. There was a Red Baron 2 piece, I think, that I picked up for a song and a dance. It
Uh-huh.
was very cheap. And that one I intended to give to my dad. And he had it on his wall for a little while. And then he couldn't get past that it was from a video game. So eventually he gave it back to me. I was like, oh,
That's
what?
funny.
Yeah. But, and it kind of went from there. So yeah.
Well, of
I
course,
also,
with your dad being from Boeing, you'd be into aviation, so you got him a plane-based piece as a result, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And James Dietz is like the artist who did it is like really big in the Seattle area. He lives here, and I've watched pieces of his art sell in aviation sales for like $20,000, $30,000. So I mean, I was like, wow, I picked this up for less than $1,000. He will really appreciate it. But
Jeremy
yeah,
Buzash, if you're listening, you underpriced it.
That was Heritage, right?
Oh, it
Heritage.
was, it was. But he was trying to sell it on the group as
Yeah.
well before that. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I've so Chris, one thing that got you and me starting to talk is, we have the Facebook group, we have the OVGA website, but as we try to figure out how to grow the website, how people want to use it, right? We're kind of watching what people upload, how they do it, right? And so it's like my exposure to your collection is because your willingness to put things on OVGA, right? And so, like, as you've described, a lot of your art is franchises that you're familiar with, right? Characters that you like. So whether starting from the cells and then the commissions and then, the opportunities with Paul Mann, right? Like, you've been able to kind of identify opportunities, right, for characters and love. Whereas I know for me, it's kind of been like, okay, I've been taught from Dan, right, and then I've
Mhm.
internalized it, right? Of okay,
That's a
right,
shaky proposition,
right.
but yeah.
Okay, I want the box art, right? And so I'm like, I don't know anything about this game, but I want the box art, and then I'm focusing on systems, and then over time artists, and now I'm getting a little better and more like, do I like how it looks, right? Because it's funny that like that's almost a late thing to come along, where I'm like focusing on what it is, and now coming full circle, like, okay, which ones do I keep, right? Which ones do I really care about? Um, and so anyway, your journey and process has been a lot longer in the making, right? Of kind of you just knowing what you like and learning and soaking it up.
For sure. And I forgot to mention another thing was when I was working on Cameo Elements of Power back in, I think I started working on that game in 2003 and it eventually shipped in 2005. But there was a fantastic artist on that, Eddie Sharam. And when we shipped the game, I had been working with the game designer on that, just suggesting little things and working on the combat system. And when we finished the game, he went to Eddie's desk and was like, I need you to find a piece of art that's cool, that you're willing to part with, that I can give to Chris for helping out.
Yeah.
And I knew none of this. And he sent it back with our executive producer on a flight back to Seattle.
Hmm.
And there was probably a week that went by and I knew nothing about it. And finally, that executive producer came down and was like, you know what? I was going to keep this and not even tell you about it. But I looked on here and it said, hey, Chris, thanks for all your help, George Andreas. So I really can't keep it because.
It's been personalized.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
that's a great story. And that was one of the notes I made to myself in preparing for this was, I pictured, okay, has Chris, like, through, like, you have contacts in the industry, have you ever used those to try and go back and find things, or is that not really possible? Or maybe you have contacts to get art from current titles, or like, does that play into your collecting in any way?
Most of the people that I know from the game industry, from probably 99 on, I think most of the stuff they do is digital art and paint.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of originals out there. And so I haven't really done that. Eddie, I still am in conversations with. I just recently bought a piece from him, which I put on the OVGA website, which is kind of like Cameo and the 3 hero characters from the game that you can turn into. There's like a dozen or so, but and that one I've always loved and got that one. But other than that, I think Steven was the only other person that I really kind of knew from the game industry that I knew did actual true artwork, physical artwork.
So, and it sounded like you knew Stephen Peringer for a number of years before. I mean, so it's been sitting in the background of this whole conversation, right?
Yeah.
But so you do have an R-type piece from him back there, right? And so, um, but it sounded like you knew him for a number of years before you knew that he did that work, and then I presume before you went and purchased it is also right.
Yeah. The way it kind of worked out was he was part of an art team, and when we would create our own slot machines, we would take math models from some of the real ones, but we would create our own artwork and these fake, casino cabinets, these land-based casino games. And he would work on these games. There was a lot of fairy tale type games and other ones, and super talented guy, but my heart was not in casual games or social casino when I've worked on Xbox and Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 2. And so it was a job for me. I still enjoyed it. It was making software and games, but he was still very passionate. Like, I know he did video game artwork in the 80s and 90s, and he was still loving it, and he would even come up with ideas for slot machines and log them in a database, so that if we ran out of ideas or we wanted to make something new, they would go through that database and find things. um, but that's how I kind of met him and worked with him. He was I was an executive producer, so I was trying to manage the schedule and make sure we had the right resources, and if something popped up, what are we going to do to regain time or whatnot. And I had to talk to leadership at the company and assure them everything was going great. I was in meetings every week, hey, everything's going great, here's status on everything. But Stephen was, working as part of an art team. The art team was very tight knit. They all loved each other, and it was kind of a hard group to break through in the beginning, because I don't have an artistic bone in my body. But eventually, it kind of broke the ice when one day they were talking about food, and Steven was a huge foodie, as well as like two other artists, and they were always trying to find new places to go and eat. And there was a barbecue place in Redmond or Bellevue called Dixie's Barbecue. It's not there anymore, but it used to be huge. They had this hot sauce, and you would go there. You used to have to wait in line for like an hour to get barbecue. And the guy who ran the joint, his name was Gene. He had this super hot sauce, and he would come by and say, "Have you met the man?" It was called the man sauce. And he would put a dab on your barbecue, and it was the hottest thing I've ever had. I had it twice and never again. Then it became fun to take your friends there and have them talk how they could handle hot anything and watch them suffer and turn colors. So but I took him there, and unfortunately, that gentleman had passed away from cancer, but his wife was still there. And, the whole art team and I got to have Dixie's Barbecue, and everybody loved it. And then they started inviting me out to lunch with them, and that's kind of how it grew from there. And one of the things I did for kind of morale boosters for my team is on Friday, I had a super gun, which is like an arcade unit that you can hook up to a TV. It's all the wires that would be inside an arcade cabinet. And then I've probably got about 150 arcade boards. So I bring in these arcade boards and 2 joysticks, and I just bring in different games that people had never seen before or that I enjoyed. And people would come by for 15 minutes and play the game and talk about it, and then go back to doing their work. And, one day I brought in like an NES and a Super NES, and I brought in, I don't know, 20 games, maybe 10 for each. And Steven came over and he was like, "Oh yeah, I did the box art for this one and this one and this one." And I
No
was like,
way.
"What?" Yeah, I was like,
Wow.
"I've been working with you for 3 years and I'm only finding this out now." And so he sent me the link to his website, and I went up and looked through it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have this one and I have this one." And I was like, "If I take you out to lunch and I bring in all my game boxes, will you sign them for me?" And he was like, "Of course. You don't have to take me out to lunch." But I took him out to lunch, and it was a lot of fun talking to him. And a little while later, he had shared like the price sheet that he had for some of his artwork. And I was like, "Man, how many of these do you still have left?" And he was like, "I sold a lot of them, but I do still have quite a few." And he was like, "You know what? Why don't we make a day out of it? Why don't you just come over to my house, and like I'll break out what I have. It'll be a fun time. You can just look through it. I'll tell you whatever I can remember about each piece." And I swear that was one of the best days of the last, 5, 10 years that I've had. Was just I went down to Seattle to a place that he loved. It was a Nashville chicken place, and it was probably a 2.5 hour round trip, but I knew he loved it, and I picked that up and brought it back for him and his wife. And we ate chicken and looked at all his artwork. Of course, we washed our hands in between, but yeah, he just had some amazing art, and it was fun to go through. He let me photograph everything, told me stories, showed me other artwork that he did outside of just game art and things like that. So it was a very memorable day.
And is that the day that leads to you buying the R-Type arcade header in the background?
Yes, yeah. So from there, I mean, when you look at the arcade header, and I actually have one here, um, it's very cool, but it's R-Type over everything, and you see a very small piece of the art and not a lot of the detail.
Yeah.
And once I saw the original artwork, and it was unobstructed, and it was a lot bigger, and it really was like, man, that game was so iconic. I had it on Turbo Graphics. I played it on Game Boy. When I first walked into the arcade and I saw it back in like 87, it blew me away.
Hmm.
And being able to see that, like, it's the kind of shows the start of the stage where you're coming out of hyperspace, and then it shows a little bit of the level, and then the end is like the giant boss battle, and there's like these shadow outlines of a tail moving around that you don't see on the arcade marquee. And I think that was my favorite story, was him telling me about how he had to cut out these friskets, and he would make his son clean his brushes, and he had to airbrush this whole thing, like cut little pieces out. And I was just like, man, this is a labor of love, and there's so much work put into this, and it's a game that I absolutely love. And so that's what led to me. I signed a contract with him and said, hey, give me 2 years to pay for this thing. And luckily, I was able to pay it off over 2 years, probably about a year and a half. And man, I tell you, when I got that back from the framer, it was a day to remember for sure.
Wow.
That's
See, like
terrific.
I knew you'd worked with him and known him, but of course, until we're having this conversation, right? I didn't never really quite knew that you knew him for so many years before this happened. That it wasn't just, I'll buy that one. How much is it? Right? That
Yeah.
it's really going over, spending time, seeing it all, falling in love. Like that's what you're talking about with the airbrushing and the frisket, like having your first exposure and learning that from the artist telling you about it, right? And then even the 2 year contract, right? Just kind of bringing it all full circle, and that's awesome. Like
Yeah.
that's I can see why it's such a standout experience for you.
One of my favorites for sure.
Um, like I feel like Dan, I still haven't gotten up to see you in Canada, right? But like I feel like that'll be the closest I get to it, right? Is like going to Dan's place, be like, all right, like show me the artwork I've seen, right? And kind of like just
Well, you're
you know,
both welcome anytime.
Nice.
I
Where
will
are
get
you
up there.
at, in Toronto or?
I'm west of there. I'm actually closer to Detroit than Toronto, but I'm on the Canadian side of the border. So
Nice.
actually, I'm wearing a Detroit shirt today because I've decided to put myself through the agony of trying to do a marathon. So I'm training for that in October in Detroit. So it's the Detroit Marathon actually goes through both the U.S. and Canada. So that'll be kind of fun, kind of running. And you run underwater because you run through the tunnel. So that'll be
Whoa,
kind of fun. But yeah, I'm closer to Detroit.
Nice.
that's cool.
Well, if I'm ever in the area, I'll let you know. I do get to travel every now and then to go visit game developers and things like that. So, or for a show. So
Cool.
that'd be great. And same, if you end up in the greater Seattle area and you ever want to swing by, let me know for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time living in Vancouver, probably 35 years, give or take, Vancouver, BC. So I do get out to the Pacific Northwest or Pacific Southwest, as I would call it, from time to time. So maybe we can make that work one day.
For sure.
And
Awesome. Okay. Well,
and
sorry, Sanford, go ahead.
no, just and so we fast forward a little bit, right? And so it sounds like you've kept up. It sounds like did you maintain a relationship with Peringer? Over the ensuing years.
A bit. I mean, it wasn't like I was seeing him on a weekly or a monthly basis, but I would check in with him constantly. I wanted to see what he was kind of up to. I was trying to hire him originally as an art director for my current company, probably about 2.5 years ago. And he had found another small company. Double Down eventually laid everybody off from the United States, minus their marketing departments, and moved all their development work to Korea. I left on my own terms like a couple months after that happened because they kept a small group of people there, and that's when I went back to Microsoft. But I know Steven was laid off along with a lot of the other artists, and they were all looking for work. And I really wanted to bring Steven on, and he had already found another gig working on casino games with
Hmm.
people in Chicago, and he seemed very happy. He had a great group to work with. He was managing other artists and got to help out on the most fun parts that he wanted to do. So he seemed very happy, and so I had to respect that, let him keep doing what he did. I did still drop by and see him a couple times. One time I know he had an eye surgery and wasn't feeling super well, but we still chatted and talked. And then I went and saw him probably about 3 months before he passed, maybe 4 months, probably 3 months. And you could tell it was kind of taking a weight on him at that point. So
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess for listeners that aren't aware, yeah, Stephen did unfortunately pass away. I believe the cause, Chris, was ALS related. Is that right?
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So condolences, obviously, to the family and to everyone that knew him, yourself included. Um, and I guess like from there, is there like so after that happened, what was your relationship like with the family? Did you keep in touch with them? Have you inquired about other artwork? How have things kind of shaped up after that?
Yeah. Well, once Stephen had passed away, actually, like when I had gone to visit him, I think in those 3 months, and I think the writing was on the wall. He was deciding how he wanted to pass. Um, his wife, I think, respected that I was into the game art and things like that. Stephen passed away, and I kept in touch. There was a very touching thing that they did for him, where they reached out to people who knew him, and they said, "Hey, if you could record a 2-minute memory that you have with Stephen and send it, we're gonna tell him we're gonna do a movie night and invite the whole family over, and then we're gonna string together this giant video of everybody saying how they've touched his life or his art has been fantastic." And so I kind of did a 2-minute video on how he had been a good friend and how I was blown away when I walked into an arcade and saw the R-type artwork for the first time and things like that. And so after he had passed, I let kind of a year go by and reached out and asked if they needed any help. I knew they wanted to sell the game art. They knew it was valuable. And I asked them if they wanted any help. And that's where I got to meet his kids. Stephen has always talked about his kids and his grandkids and playing Lego games with them and things like that. So from that point on, I went over and met them all. They pulled out all the artwork, and there were some pieces in there that I hadn't seen when I was over with Stephen. So I think they just had found some other ones.
Hmm.
And we went through each one, and I told them what it was from. As far as I knew, I think there was one piece we couldn't identify, which luckily Sanford helped,
Yeah.
which was the RC Super RC Pro Am for Game Boy. It was kind of a standee or whatnot,
Yeah.
and we were trying to decide if it would be better to sell them privately or through an outlet like Heritage. And I think I had sold several $100,000 worth of graded video games through them, and I
Hmm.
had nothing but positive experiences. And so we kind of sent the photographs to them, let them look at them, and they were interested in anything that had video game, video game tie-in.
Yeah.
And the RC Pro Am, they initially didn't want it because we couldn't find anything for it. But once
Mm.
we figured out where it was from, they said we would love that one too.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of worked with Evan at Heritage. I got a very good deal when I got in like 2020, 2021, when the graded video game market was just blowing up, and they were just so hungry to get pieces back then that I got
Hmm.
a fantastic rate for my games. And so I negotiated basically to get that exact same rate for the family. And they were
Terrific.
very, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So all the money from that is going to them. And
Terrific.
we decided that they would go into the family decided that they were going to go into 3 different auctions. One will be a signature auction, and that'll have the most pieces. And then there'll be 2 smaller ones. I think one of them's a Nintendo showcase and one of them's a PC game showcase. But all of those will happen, I believe, this May through July,
Hmm.
maybe August.
Awesome, awesome. That's a really touching story about the movie night, and a nice thing you did for them too, in terms of helping them negotiate to get a good rate on the sale, because that
Yeah.
does make a big difference. I mean, the standard rates are high, so if you can whittle those down, it's just extra money in the family's pocket, and I'm
Yeah.
sure they could use it after losing Steven.
For sure.
And so I know, listeners here, members in the group will kind of recognize that, back on March 10th, Mario Day, right? You kind of dropped some pictures in the group, right? And so, like, one of the, premier pieces, at least my view, right, that I know is coming to the auction is going to be, one of these first magazine promotion illustrations for Super Mario 64, right? And it's got Mario swinging Bowser by the tail. And so, like, that, I know that one excites me. And one of the things we've talked about with you, Chris, and kind of teeing this up for a second part to this conversation is the family has sent these things into Heritage, but through Chris's relationship with the family and going over there and taking pictures and helping identify things, what we're going to plan to do is do a kind of a part two of this conversation where Chris will be, doing a screen share, showing us some of those images, walking through them, hopefully the next week or two, right? And that this will be something that we'll be able to kind of preview ahead of when all the pictures are getting uploaded on Heritage, and right. And so, Chris, through the conversations today, right, you've been sharing, right, that part of this conversation is, the little memories and things that Stephen shared with you, right, as he was looking at these pieces. So to the extent you remember those things and sharing it with the previews and the artwork, just kind of, I guess, our own little part to preview the art, and hopefully that helps get right whatever traction or visibility on those pieces for the family.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate you guys letting me come on and show you some of the stuff early, so people will get excited, and then we can follow up and post them in the forum as well, so people can see it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrific.
Now I think one thing that I know is on my mind and Dan's mind, and I'm sure you've been a big help to the family, right? But I imagine you've also had an opportunity to pick up anything additional for yourself through that process.
I did make an offer to the family for, I think, 5 pieces of artwork, and they countered, and I felt their counter was very fair. And quite honestly, I didn't want to bid against you guys. And so I actually had to go and raid my retirement a little bit, but I 100% love the pieces that I got, and they are all going to be hung on the wall. I've gotten 4 of them back from framing, and they're going to be enjoyed for sure for a long time to come.
Are you in a position to share what those are, or is now not the time, or
just one of them?
I'll tell you
I mean,
3 of them.
I could guess what at least half of them are. Yeah.
Yeah. So one piece is the side art that goes along with the marquee for the arcade machine.
Sure.
And that was the most expensive, but the one that I really wanted to kind of match with the other one. I felt they deserved to be together.
Yeah. I think it's his most desirable piece that he ever did, personally.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, but I that's a tremendous piece. It's the beautiful arcade side art. It's the Game Boy box. It's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And then he did kind of a promotional piece that was on an ad. He calls it Space Snakes, or that's what a lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
know it
yeah,
by.
yeah,
The
yeah.
pink one,
Yeah,
yeah.
But it's the second level boss from the game. I
Right.
think a lot of people don't recognize that, but that one I wanted because it kind of went along with the game. And then he had the Super Nintendo box art for Super R-Type. So those are 3 of the 5 pieces that I was very blessed to acquire from the family. So
Congratulations, those are wonderful.
Yeah,
thank you.
it's awesome. I mean, you really can't get, like, as Dan was saying, right? Like, I was going through, wasn't sure where our conversation would go today, thinking they're like, okay, what are my favorites? What do I really like? And like, it's hard to top our tape, right? And you have a personal connection to it. It
Yeah.
was the one behind you, one of the first ones you got from him, and to kind of go back and first, unite those 2 pieces, but then to add the other ones as well is awesome.
For sure. Yeah.
I would have been bidding against you for sure.
I know.
And so, what I think what's kind of fun is Chris has kept Dan and I in suspense, right? Even like leading up to this our conversation today, and even for when we do this second half, right? Kind of doing a preview that I don't know which pieces are going yet in May. right? And so like I think Chris and I will be doing it. The two of us kind of for me, I'll be discovering in real time which pieces are coming and kind of then figuring out, okay, what's my budget, right? Am I going to be able to add something Peringer? And so yeah, maybe we'll all be bidding. Well, you won't be bidding against us, and Dan and I will be bidding against each other.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'll probably put in some low level bids, but yeah, anything you guys want, I'm sure you will outdo me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for the auction, right? Because I think one thing we had, when Stephen passed, right, as Dan and I and Ibrahim were kind of talking of, like, it was probably more me pushing, right? Of like, hey, let's do an episode on Peringer, right? And like, let's talk about him. And because, when an artist is alive, we'd love to be able to bring them on as an artist spotlight. And I think, then you lose someone, you lose a talent, and you lose that ability to have an episode about them or talk about them. And so, it's kind of worked out naturally that you're someone who knew him, who's able to come and talk with us. But even before that, some of the thought process was he did some really significant work, right? And a lot of us that own game art, whenever we can, we're going to want to keep it. We might sell things, but we're doing it to buy something else, right? And if we can hang on to it all, we will. And so some of the highest tier pieces aren't going to come to market. And I think having his estate through this whole process end up, some key pieces end up in heritage like this. I think it'll be exciting for the hobby, right? For people that are hopefully spotlight on it, an opportunity to buy something. Because I know
sure.
if I owned the pieces, I wouldn't be sending them the auction, right? I'd be happy to just keep them myself.
Yeah, and I do feel that like for the last few years there hasn't been. I think since there was Bionic Commando and Prince of Persia, there hasn't been super high quality pieces. I don't want to say they're not high quality, but I mean they haven't been to this level. So I'm excited to see some excitement and some of these classic pieces go up for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to really comment on that though because I don't know what they are apart from Mario and Bowser, which is cool. Yeah, and there's definitely a big interest in N64 the last few years, and very, very, very almost literally zero art on the market for it. So that'll be interesting to see how that does.
No, I mean, and we can't forget, even if it was inflated, COVID, all that stuff, right? You did have the $1.5 million Mario 64 sale.
Yep.
Right? And kind of thinking how much are not that game sale is not a proxy for the art sale, right? But there's something about the significance of that game, right? Makes me interested in it. I had an N64. I had a Super Mario 64. If you do want N64 art, like what is kind of better, right? I mean, it's not box art, right? But how much painted box art is there?
Well, and first party too, hard to get anything first party, and then all the first party N64 stuff would be digital, so
yeah.
Iconic characters, iconic series, and it's announcing the release date of the Nintendo 64 for the first time, so it's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah,
I think the other piece that I know we'll probably be wrapping up here in a minute, kind of a good place to end the episode to a little bit of an anticipation of the preview to come, but I think what's surprising is how long Chris was doing work for Nintendo. So, the N64, that's 96-ish, right? But I mean, he was
Steven, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what I said.
Said Chris.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was giving you extra credit. Right. So Steven's doing, the Mario 64 art 96, right? But like his arcade flyers were pre-NES. Right. So he did some work for the VS system, which was 83, 84 before the NES comes out in 85, 86. And so to have done stuff from that very beginning of Nintendo before Nintendo was Nintendo, right. For the American audiences, all the way to, their marquee release for the N64 is kind of a very cool longevity. And so I hope, we're going to have a variety of that come into auction.
There's some good stuff in there.
Cool.
Love it. End on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Love it.
Dan, Chris, any final thoughts?
No, just I mean, from my perspective, it's been a pleasure to chat. Thanks, Chris, and no, I'm looking forward to seeing part two. I won't be joining you guys for part two, so I'll look forward to watching it like everybody else out there.
Right on.
Excellent.
Thanks
Hey,
again for having me, guys. It's been a lot of fun, and yeah, I just want to give the focus and the spotlight on Stephen. He was a very kind of soft-spoken guy. He was very humble. I never saw him trying to take credit for things or anything like that, and just a very creative guy. And the world is definitely a little bit of a sadder place without him, but he does live on through his kids and his grandkids and his wife, and so I'm super happy that I got to know him while he was here.
yeah, that's
Awesome. Well
fantastic.
said. Well said.
And he lives on through his artwork too. Like, not to be cliche, right? But I mean, he did a lot of art that is remembered and thought of fondly by us and other gamers, collectors, people around the world, which is very cool.
Yep. Even outside video games, like he did a Steve Miller album cover and a bunch of other stuff.
Oh,
So
I didn't know that.
yeah, he's done some amazing stuff. And even some of the last pieces that I saw, he would take bowling pins and kind of create characters out of the bowling pins, birds and other things. I mean, his mind was always working and finding something new and creative to do. It was awesome.
What's the Steve Miller album cover, if you don't mind me asking? Do
We'll
you
have
remember
to.
the one? I don't mean to put you. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Don't worry about it. I was just
No.
curious because I do like Steve Miller, and that's news to me. So I'll look it up or find out. No sweat.
Okay. I can
I
probably
think
tell
I
you here in
found it.
no
I think
time
it's
flat.
Circle of Love,
Yep.
1983.
Circle of Love. Okay. Yeah, that fits the time. That's the right timeline. Okay.
And so now we're gonna have to, Ibrahim. Now you're gonna have to throw in the Steve Miller
picture
Circle
of
of
it.
Love. You're gonna get to the end of the episode, doing all the edits. You're like, I'm done. I'm all set. And now throwing in the overlay of Steve Miller Circle
Dan
of Love.
couldn't have just shut up about
Yeah.
Circle of Love. He had to. Yeah, that's a pretty cool image.
Yeah.
I like that too.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap it there. Thanks, Chris. And hey, great talking to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys. And I will talk to you again soon, Sanford.
Yep.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
See you guys.
See you soon. Take care.
Bye.